As the first light of dawn illuminated the blue skies of Arclis, a sudden alarm echoed from one of the outpost stations along the planet's border. The Colony Defense Force headquarters was analyzing incoming signals. In the midst of this quiet morning, reports from the surveillance satellites were alarming. An unidentified fleet had breached the outer security perimeter and was rapidly approaching. Such an event had never occurred since Arclis' founding. Captain Eden Voss entered his office at the sound of the alert, his attention immediately drawn to the red blips pulsing on the map table. The display showed invaders looming over the small and young colony. "Lieutenant Jarek, what's the situation?" Voss asked, his eyes glued to the screens. Lieutenant Jarek swiftly analyzed the data flashing across the monitor. "Approximately 12 spacecraft, Captain. Their identities remain unknown, but their approach is hostile. Judging by the size of the fleet, this isn't a reconnaissance mission. This could be the first wave of an assault." Voss clenched his jaw as he focused on the unfolding threat. Arclis was facing an attack before they'd even had the chance to fully activate their defense systems. Their defense ships were insufficient, and the local forces lacked the experience to fend off a large-scale invasion. But they had no intention of surrendering. Humanity's Federation had always defended its borders and protected its colonies. "Sub-officers," Voss called out, "activate the defense systems. Begin evacuating the civilian settlements. We're forming the first line of resistance against the fleet. This planet will not fall." The command center sprang into action. Voss issued rapid orders as they reviewed the planet's defense plans. Evacuation teams began moving the colony's inhabitants into secure underground shelters. The first battle would commence as soon as the enemy ships violated the local airspace. The defense satellites in low orbit were activated, and laser cannons locked onto the incoming ships. Within hours, the enemy fleet began its rapid descent toward Arclis' atmosphere. From the command center, Voss watched the invader ships' formations on the screen. As they neared the planet's defense lines, the satellite laser cannons opened fire. The sky lit up as energy blasts streaked across the atmosphere, striking some of the invader ships, though many appeared unaffected. "Captain, the enemy ships are using energy shields," Lieutenant Jarek reported, panic evident in his voice. "More power. Full capacity for the laser cannons," Voss ordered, feeling a knot of unease, though he didn't show it. The military strategies of the Human Federation had never faced technology like this before. This wasn't just a typical assault. Meanwhile, civilians were being evacuated to underground bunkers. People, in a state of panic, rushed to the shelters, directed by local security forces, as the noise of the battle above intensified. The sounds of explosions and distant clashes from the upper atmosphere were audible even on the surface. On the evacuation routes, people supported one another, while security officers kept broadcasting over their radios, "Stay calm. Everyone will enter the shelters in order. Children and the elderly first." Voss knew the battle was escalating. With their military strength limited, they were forced to make tactical retreats to buy time. "Captain, enemy ships are breaching the lower atmosphere. Ground-based defenses are being activated," Jarek reported, never taking his eyes off the screen. "But their technology is far more advanced than we anticipated." Voss took a deep breath. "Activate all defense lines. This planet cannot fall. The battle begins now." As the enemy ships descended lower, nearing the surface, the planetary defense forces sprang into action. Drones flying in low orbit launched their assault on the enemy ships. Armed with energy cannons and missiles, the drones rained fire on the invading fleet. Arclis' sky became ablaze with glowing energy beams. Human Federation ships clashed with the invaders, while ground-based defense batteries unleashed heavy fire on the enemy vessels. Both sides were taking significant losses. One of the enemy ships plummeted to the ground, causing a massive explosion. A huge crater formed on Arkley's surface, with dust and smoke filling the air. The human forces were doing everything they could to hold the invaders at bay, but the technological disparity was clear. Voss grabbed his radio and gave an order to all forces. "The battle continues. Hold your positions. We must repel this invasion." However, Voss knew this was only the beginning. The enemy ships exploding in the sky could be a prelude to an even larger assault. As the skies darkened, the conflict over Arklys intensified. Many enemy ships had descended below the atmosphere, launching attacks from close range. Under the command of Captain Voss, the colony defense force was doing its best to resist the invaders with their limited resources. But with every passing moment, Voss received more reports of fallen soldiers and damaged defense systems. In the central command, the map table flickered red, marking the positions of enemy ships one by one. Arkley's ground-based defense batteries were active, but the advanced energy shields used by the invaders rendered human munitions ineffective. Voss' face was tense, his eyes fixed on the screen, thinking about the next move. "Lieutenant Jarek," Voss said, his voice firm, "we need a more effective tactic. We can't win this war while the invaders have their shields up." Lieutenant Jarek paused for a moment, then quickly responded, "Captain, the energy shields are designed to withstand high-energy projectiles, but we've been working on frequency modulation. If we can temporarily disrupt the shield's energy, our missile systems should be able to land direct hits." Voss considered the tactic. It was risky, but they had no other choice. "Let's try it," he said decisively. "Update all missile batteries with the new software targeting shield frequencies. We won't give them a chance." The intensity of the battle created a constant tension in the command center. Outside, Arkley's surface was ablaze under the assault, with enemy ships flying low, striking colony buildings and defense positions. The colonists had taken shelter underground, but each explosion echoed even in the depths. "Missile batteries are ready, Captain," Lieutenant Jarek announced, turning his gaze from the screen to Captain Voss. The red dots on the screen represented enemy ships, while the blue ones marked the human defense points. This was the colony's last line of defense. Voss took a deep breath and gave the order, "Fire!" On the battlefield outside, the ground-based missile batteries roared to life. The missiles ascended into the atmosphere, locking onto the enemy ships. Each was programmed to attack with the new frequencies aimed at the invaders' shield systems. Amid the flashes of energy bursts in the sky, some ships' shields began to falter. One ship crashed to the ground with a massive explosion. Flames consumed it as clouds of smoke and debris rose into the air. Another ship was hit, starting to tilt as it lost control. The human forces had secured a small victory, but the battle was far from over. As one of the enemy ships fell, the colony's defense forces seized the moment to mobilize their ground troops. The invaders' troops were descending from their ships, and the first ground skirmish was inevitable. Voss had been waiting for this moment. Local soldiers and armored vehicles moved swiftly toward the landing zone where the invaders were making landfall. Every step was met with explosions, gunfire, and screams. Arkley's green valleys had now turned into a battlefield. Captain Voss ensured his troops were positioning themselves strategically. The ground forces represented a new hope for humanity. The invaders may have had technological superiority, but Arkley's soldiers were brave and determined. The human instinct for survival and the desire to defend their freedom were the driving forces in this war. Especially Captain Tarrin's unit, which had encircled the enemy forces. Armed with laser rifles and explosive devices, the soldiers attacked the invaders swiftly. Captain Terran tried to draw the enemy into close combat, negating their technological advantages. The invaders were cold-blooded and formidable warriors inside their armor, but Terran and his team managed to find weaknesses in the enemy's armor. As the troops fought with their massive energy weapons, beams of laser light illuminated the battlefield. Exploding energy cannons and shattered devices littered the ground, leaving everything in smoke. Terran and his men continued to push through the enemy lines. Back at the command center, the full horror of the battle was on display. Captain Voss watched the ground forces advance on the screen, but the increasing number of enemy ships worried him. The invaders had not been fully defeated yet. A larger wave of attacks was on the way. Voss clenched his jaw, muttering to himself, "We can't finish this battle here. More are coming. We need reinforcements." He decided to send an urgent distress signal to the Federation. The identity of the invaders remained unknown, but to repel an assault of this magnitude, they needed more power. Voss wasn't sure if they could win this battle, but surrender wasn't an option for him. Grabbing the radio, he issued one final order to all units. "Hold your positions. The main fleet of the invaders hasn't arrived yet, but when they do, we'll be ready for them. Arklys will not fall. The Human Federation will defend this frontier." Outside, as the war raged on, the people of Arklys and its defense forces would stand firm, determined to follow Voss' command to the very end. But Voss knew this was only the beginning. The sky lit up with the descent of massive invading ships entering the atmosphere. Over Arklys, it was as if a storm had broken loose from the void of space. The enemy's main fleet had finally begun its approach to the surface. Captain Voss glanced at the main map table inside the command center. The density and mobility of the enemy fleets would soon push the defense lines to their limits. The Central Command wouldn't hold much longer. Only a brilliant military strategy and a bold maneuver could turn the tide in their favor. Voss, watching the enemy's movements on the screen, let his thoughts wander for a moment. The Federation's delay was frustrating, but he hadn't hesitated for even a second. Surrender was not an option. "Jarek, give the order to all remaining forces," Voss said. "We're setting up a wide perimeter defense against their lines. We'll break them up and encircle them." Lieutenant Jarek swiftly relayed the captain's orders. The defense forces were scattered, but with this new strategy, they might disrupt the invaders' organized advance. The enemy might have had technological superiority, but humanity could still win this war through sacrifice and cunning. Ships breaking off from the main invading fleet started launching more focused attacks on the surface. The forward anti-air batteries and entrenched defense lines were burning and exploding under the intense enemy fire. With every ship that descended into the atmosphere, explosions rained down across every corner of Arklys. The tremors were felt even deep underground. Captain Terran's unit found themselves right in the middle of the battle. As the enemy ground forces began their descent, the soldiers protecting the city center were engaged in fierce combat. Terran's eyes were drawn to the enemy's advanced walking machines. The 7-meter-tall robotic giants were wreaking havoc, inflicting heavy casualties on the human soldiers. But Terran's resolve remained unshaken. "Prepare the explosives," Terran shouted through the military radio. His soldiers quickly moved into position, waiting for the machines to get closer. Each explosion lit up the sky with giant energy orbs, casting a red glow across the battlefield. The human defense lines trembled under the machines' forward push, but under Terran's leadership, the soldiers had found the key to push them back. With a few of his troops, Terran quickly placed explosives around the legs of the towering machines. The sound of an explosion filled the air. One of the massive machines, like a collapsing giant, tipped over and crashed to the ground. Seizing the moment, Terran shouted, "Advance!" His voice was filled with determination. We're pushing them back." The enemy forces hesitated for a brief moment in the face of this guerrilla-style attack. Despite the invaders' technological prowess, they struggled to stand against the human spirit's determination and strategic strikes. Voss continued watching the enemy's movements from the command center. Reports confirmed that humanity's defense forces had suffered heavy losses, but every small victory boosted their morale. "Captain, Terran's unit has halted the enemy's advance. Our defense lines are holding," Jarek said. But Voss knew this was his moment. "Keep up the pressure," he said sternly. "The enemy hasn't pulled back their main fleet yet. If we strike now, we can corner them." Voss had been waiting for this. His strategy was to weaken the enemy shields and shatter their defenses. Lieutenant Jarek quickly grasped the plan and took immediate action. Orders were relayed to all defense lines. Every remaining ground battery and heavy weapon locked onto the enemy ships. The sky once again filled with flaming projectiles. Humanity launched an all-out assault against the enemy fleets, using every last ounce of power they had. Explosions and missile fire began to weaken the massive ship's shields. When the first large enemy ship fell from the sky, crashing to the surface in a colossal explosion, the command center erupted in cheers of victory. "We've taken down another ship," a soldier shouted, his eyes locked on the screen. But Voss's eyes remained focused on the screen. The main ship of the enemy fleet was still standing, and he knew it. All of these efforts were just a means to buy time to bring down that flagship. Voss's plan was a final assault on the enemy's flagship. He had one last card to play, a massive nuclear weapon hidden beneath the surface of Arclis. The key was precise timing. "The time has come," Voss said, looking at Jarek. "We're going to attack the main ship. Lock all missile systems onto that target. If we fail, this war will go on forever." Jarek immediately executed the orders. Hundreds of missiles locked onto the flagship were fired simultaneously. The ship's shields were cracking. This was humanity's last chance to win the war. A storm of fire erupted in the sky. The flagship reeled from hit after hit. Its energy shields had held as long as they could, but finally they gave way. Massive explosions erupted across the ship's surface. Slowly, the colossal vessel turned into a burning fireball, descending steadily toward the surface. When it finally crashed, a massive explosion echoed across the wide plains of Arclis. With the enemy's destruction, the sky over Arclis cleared. For a brief moment, silence enveloped everything. Humanity had won a great victory. Captain Voss took a deep breath. He knew the war was over, but the cost had been steep. Countless brave souls had given their lives for this victory on the plains of Arclis. But today, once again, humanity had defended its freedom. "This is just one victory," Voss said quietly to himself, his eyes gazing into the distance. "But it's one of the most important in human history." I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye. See you in the next story.